Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Welln'ish. The first month of this podcast, I've decided to dedicate it to something very important to me. A lot of you know I did a big research project on endometriosis. And to me, endometriosis really has come to embody everything that's wrong or lacking with women's health. You know, I know so many women in general, even without a endometriosis diagnosis, who have been told that, you know, if you have a debilitating period, that's normal. I even treated someone who got shushed while she was in labor and said, we don't do that here. You know, I just feel like in general, we have a long way to go before women's health. You know, women are really treated properly in the medical community. And endometriosis is really, to me, the epitome of that. So in qualitative research that I found doing my project, you know, for on average about 8 years, women feel unheard, dismissed, and they really go through a roller coaster of emotions, before they get their endometriosis diagnosis. And, you know, if you turn to social media or do a Google search, everyone will assure you, you know, have your green smoothie, meditate, write in your positivity journal, like you'll get better. But that is so far from the reality. I've talked to so many women now, and I mean, even in published research, and that is just never the case. There is so much more that we need to consider about chronic disease, and it's really not a quick fix is not the solution. So what I want people to take out of this is if you know somebody with endometriosis in your life, have a listen today and you'll really see why it's so important to be able to support people in your life dealing with this, because it's very hard. And today I've invited Nathalie. She's somebody I've had the pleasure to get to know over the past year. She is a badass career counselor and coach who not only fights her endo on a daily basis, but also helps to fight to help immigrants gain employment and empowerment when they get into Canada. So I welcome.
Thank you, Riley. What a sweet intro. You already got me blushing.
Well, it's the truth. It's the truth. I just really hope that women in a similar situation can listen to your story and feel heard and understood, and reduce some of the shame that there is around endometriosis. And I just would like for people to get to know your stories. So here we go. So I guess what I would first like to start talking about is kind of giving our listeners an idea of what this whole, take us back to 10 years ago when you first started having symptoms and what it was like then, living and just navigating the medical system.
Yeah. So it's funny because it's kind of, we always say hindsight is 20/20 vision, right? So I wouldn't have been able to tell you from 2007 to 2012 that I was developing those symptoms. But now looking back, I can pinpoint exactly when my energy levels shifted. I used to be a massive morning person and wake up like an Energizer bunny. And ever since 2007, things shifted. And at first I thought it was because I went and lived abroad. I was in Ecuador for a year and I had a placement in the mountains, and then I did some trips in the Amazon. So at first I thought maybe I caught a parasite, maybe, those famous parasites in your intestines, because I was really getting lethargic and having some digestive issues that started. And everything came back negative. And so I kept moving on with my life, and I actually went abroad and worked abroad and was starting to get extremely sick. So in 2009, I had these outbursts of not being able to go to the toilet without crying. I would be bent over in pain and having what I thought were diarrhea attacks, pardon the visual, and it felt like knives were digging in my intestines. It felt like it was worse than period pains, and my period pains are pretty bad. So fine. And the reason why I think it was really hard for me to have more follow-up and diagnosis for several years was that I was traveling and working abroad. So I wasn't in my healthcare system. I was, kind of a guest in another country. So I was still a little bit too new to all of that. Added to the fact that I find as a society, as a woman, especially a younger woman at the time, we're kind of always told, oh, don't worry your pretty little head. You're young, you're healthy, you're fit, you're slim. So I just kind of always felt like I was an over warrior because I do have a very analytical nature. So, for some people it's determined that I worry a lot, but I think a lot. Anyway, so the real, I would say, beginning of my endometriosis journey was in 2012. Because in 2012, I finally moved back to Canada and I settled in Quebec. I'm originally from Ontario, but I settled in Quebec and finally started having a bit more stability. So I was looking into things a bit more. And, but even then, like from 2012 to 2018, so that's another 6 years. So, we're going from 2007 to then what did I just say? 2012 to 2018. And during that 6-year period, I had male medical professionals. Now, I've had amazing medical professionals, but when it comes to gynecology, urology, anything to do with female intimate parts, I was having a bad experience. I was told that my period pains were, totally normal. Even routine pap tests were excruciating to me. And I had a intercourse situation in the past, which is probably something that, I associated as to why I was having challenges with the pap test. But it finally took in 2018, I was progressively changing my medical professionals to women because I was saying to myself, I keep being made to feel like this is all in my head. And I'm in my 20s and I'm waking up in the middle of the night to pee. Like this is not normal at my age. I even had a urologist say to me, how often are you getting up? Like, is it more, or going to the bathroom? Is it more than 10 times a day? And if it's only once a night, it's really no big deal. I was like, but I'm in my 20s. Like how is this normal to get up in the middle of the night? Like my quality of sleep was getting severely affected. So all these things combined, I finally changed and got a female GP. And that's where things shifted for me. I finally felt heard. Like I had someone who was asking me, where do you think this has come from? Like, how do you feel about this path that we could consider? Like all of a sudden I felt part of the conversation and not someone who was taking someone else's time needlessly. And so because I had a good experience with a female GP, I started kind of exploring and saying to myself, can I switch all my medical professionals to women? Then I got my first female gynae in 2018. And that for me, 2018, so we're now 2022, that's only 4 years. But, which I say only, if you're suffering from endo, 4 years is a long time. But when I look at the grand scheme of things, that's really recently for me. And I'll never forget, it was during a routine gynecological appointment. And it was my first time with this gynecologist. And she goes, you shouldn't have this much pain for a routine exam. And you shouldn't be bleeding too.
Oh my gosh.
And so that's when I remember her saying, I think you have. And she said this word. And I went, endo what? And I remember, I distinctly remember going, endo what? A couple of times because I'd never heard of this word before.
Yeah.
And then I discovered that it impacts fertility as well. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's how I got started to know the word, start researching the word, and start building myself a team of medical professionals that I felt I could trust and that I had a good connection with. And I know that itself is a privilege. A lot of people in the Quebec healthcare system don't have family doctors yet. Like me, it was a friend of a friend told me about someone who was still accepting, because otherwise I probably would still be on the wait list for that famous phone call system that I never got a call from. So yes, I think I've lost a little bit track of
No, that was perfect. I'm like trying to recall some of our first conversations that we had. So after that appointment, is that where you kind of found those books that really helped you? And
Yes, exactly. So that was the second kind of aha moment for me was I started researching, of course, what do you do? Google, right? So I started Googling and stumbled on a book called The Doctor Will See You Now, Recognizing and Treating Endometriosis by Tamer I think you pronounce it Sedgkin, but it's Sekin.
okay.
But I actually remember I got it as an audiobook because that way I could listen to it when I was driving in the car. And I will never forget crying in the car. And I was crying of relief and of joy. And because he said in the audiobook, he said, yes, your pain is real. No, you are not crazy. And yes, there is hope. And I was like, oh my God. Oh my goodness, it all makes sense now. And everything he was describing, all the different symptoms I had, the supposed IBS that I had been diagnosed with in the past, the supposed bladder problem, which is called
I was going to ask you, how many
cystitis.
diagnoses have you gotten?
So I've had like 3 separate diagnoses, IBS, interstitial cystitis, and anxiety. So I've had those 3 diagnoses put together. And then another one, I forgot, I meant to bring the book, but I'll tell you about it. The second one, which I've been finding very helpful, like The Doctor Will See You Now is very helpful, I find, for helping you not feel crazy. And helping you connect the dots. Because that's when I realized that, in fact, all these symptoms that I were having were the clusters that were actually the symptoms of endometriosis and not actually individual diagnoses. Then another book, and I've only got into 2 because in all honesty, it's a full-time job. So between managing my symptoms, doing the research, the medical appointments, and sometimes you just want a break from reading about your medical condition. So I'm still in the process of reading, but I really enjoyed it. It's called Beating Endo, How to Reclaim Your Life from Endometriosis. So already with that title, I was like, yes, please.
Please.
And it's Iris Karen Orbach. And it's, if I'm not mistaken, 2 physiotherapists. I can't remember if it's physiotherapists or osteopaths. My apologies for the confusing.
It's probably a
I know.
physio.
Okay. And they're really quite experts from the US, and they give you tools on how to actually manage some of those symptoms. So some positions, some exercises, with diagrams, like with the actual drawings and images. So I've been finding that really helpful as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, so all of that helped you feel understood and heard, but the struggle did not stop there, because something that you weren't told is how endometriosis, well, I mean, you weren't told they even had this, but had it been diagnosed earlier, then maybe somebody would have mentioned to you the fact that this can lead to a lot of fertility issues. Yes. So if you're comfortable, I wanted to just let people know, like, how all of this, you know, how you eventually, how you're dealing with your fertility, how it affected you, how your endo kind of went from there after finally hearing the word.
Yeah, sure. And I think what's important to mention too, that in North America, I find we're a little bit behind in endometriosis research and studies. The UK seems to be much more advanced. There's a really cool center in London where it's like an endometriosis center. And when this pandemic is a little bit calmer with regards to travel, I definitely want to go check it out sometime. But what I think is really important to mention is that endometriosis is actually, yes, hard to diagnose because it's not very, I mean, it's an invisible illness, right? Because it's invisible, it's actually quite hard to detect. And unless you do a physical diagnostic, it can be very hard to detect in any other way. Okay. So on ultrasound, unless you are really experienced with endometriosis, you might not realize that that's what you're looking at. And sometimes it can even be missed on an MRI. So that's at least what I had understood and what, in a way, I choose to believe. Because I had been told, we're quite certain you have it. These are the possible consequences you can have. but we don't know to what extent, and we won't be able to know unless we go in. And going in isn't just going through a vaginal probe, it's going in laparoscopically, which involves, going through different layers of skin through your abdominal wall with at least 4 to 5 incisions, which, while they're small, is still a pretty invasive and big surgery.
Yeah.
So I wasn't ready for that. So we were thankfully able to explore a couple of options, which is a blood test that, again, I'm not a medical professional. I'm just telling you from my personal experience, the things that I wish people would have told me. And something that can give you an idea of whether or not you have endometriosis is the blood test that's called CA125, because of the tumor markers. So that way you can already get a sense if you do have tumors in your body, because ultimately endometriosis are a form of benign growing tumors from the endometrium lining of your uterus, right? So it could already give you an idea. So that was what I would say was the most kind of like super helpful way that you can determine it. In addition to the symptoms, like with Michael Simkin's book, about if you're having painful periods, like extremely painful periods to the point where you can't focus, you can't think, like periods now, I know from this journey, which I didn't know before, aren't supposed to make you stop your daily life. But if they do, well, there's a problem. Yeah. So if you have that happening, and then in addition to that, you have a change in flow. So let's say it's either a really extreme flow or a very little flow. Those two extremes could be a kind of warning sign, combined with pain, pelvic pain, painful intercourse, bladder problems, because depending on the tumors, like in my case, it's tented over my bladder in half. So it gives my body the impression I have a smaller bladder. So those really help, I think, with kind of giving you already a sense before having to consider even surgery. Now, for the fertility piece, yes, one of the most massive challenges, I think, is that endometriosis is a growing disease, right? And the growing disease is, I'm sorry, it's because my husband hasn't closed the door and now my dog is in the background and making noise. But so what ends up happening is that because it's a growing disease, where you're at in 2018 may not be at where you're at in 2022. So in a way, I was extremely lucky and extremely unlucky. But in 2020, right before my birthday, like I was there 2 days before my birthday.
It's like, happy birthday.
Yeah. My birthday present was actually getting let out of the hospital. So that was nice. But so I ended up going to the hospital in October of 2020 in excruciating pain. Like I have painful periods, but when it keeps me from sleeping, even after Tylenols, and it wakes me up from my, like I was able to fall asleep at 2 a.m., but by 4, I was like, I can't. My husband took me to the hospital, and by chance, my gynae, the one who had first uttered the word endometriosis, was there on call, and we decided to do an emergency surgery. Now, the emergency surgery was going to be from the cysts that I started developing from the endometriosis. But then in the end, they couldn't do it because they discovered it was so advanced. My ovaries were handcuffed in a way behind my uterus with the endometriosis. Sorry, she's doing it again.
It's fine.
Hopefully you can't hear it too much. And there was also, they couldn't access the parts of my organs that they were planning to do, they were planning to operate on. Once they saw the extent, endometriosis functions with stages. Thankfully, it's usually benign. So stage 4 being the most advanced is what I have. And all that they could do was actually biopsies, confirm that that is indeed endometrium cells, and just confirm I had it visually. So that is the hardest per se. And with your fertility, because it's a growing disease, if you end up having to take hormones for your fertility, you're helping the endometriosis continue to grow to a certain extent because it's food for the cells. But to on another aspect, it impacts your fertility with regards to even your egg quality. We're not sure why, but your egg quality and ovarian reserve.
I mean, from an osteopathic standpoint, when your ovaries are literally like glued to your posterior abdominal wall. And essentially, like, this is the visual that I like to give people is like there's like a massive spider web in your abdomen and your organs are deformed. So how are your organs supposed to live and work and function optimally? It's just, anyway.
Yeah, these are the types of things where you don't know until you know.
Yeah.
So for me, the challenge has been, that I started exploring my fertility in 2017 at the way beginning. And that was because my partner and I had been together for several years and we just wanted to do our due diligence and acquire. And we had been told, if you've been trying naturally for a year and nothing succeeds, then, go and have a conversation with our team. And in my case, they were like, it's not quite been a year and you guys are all fully healthy. In my case, all my numbers were good. Mm-hmm. There was nothing other than that blood test that suggested I might have endometriosis. And because lots of women who do have endometriosis are able to get pregnant, I think they kind of didn't consider that as a primary concern. But in 2018, we did all the tests because there's a lot of tests that you have to do. Mm-hmm. 2019, I started a new career and I was like, you know what? I don't even want to focus on this anymore. And in 2020, I was like, okay, you know what? Like, I better get moving on this. Mm-hmm. Because I was starting to get echoes from people around me that it might not be as easy as you think to actually move in your fertility journey. So we started moving on that, and we had our first procedure a week before COVID officially struck and before everything shut down. Wow. So then we went through another year of just being on hormones, and I think that, it was less than a year, it was 8 months. I think those more like 6. I think those months of being on those hormones unsupervised regularly are what led my body to a bit of a shutdown in October and got me in the ER actually. Because they said when they went in, they said I was in, they call it a flare up when your endo is really irritated. And they said they couldn't even touch me with a finger without me bleeding. Everything would bleed. It was like insta bleed.
Okay.
So it was bad. Yeah.
So they operated on you. They were trying to operate on your endometriosis. And when they got in there, it was really flared up.
Well, they knew I had cysts. They didn't actually know 100% like the endometriosis situation. They suspected it. And when they couldn't access when they opened me up, they saw it right away.
Okay.
They didn't even need to go any further. The issue was that then they couldn't proceed on the removals of the cysts. And they considered actually doing some potential excision surgery, but we were looking at a minimum of 4 to 5 hours and something that I hadn't consented to before.
Okay.
I went under. So, and I'm grateful that the surgeon decided, you know what, because this could involve like important impacts for the future, like it could have perforated my bowel. Yeah. They wanted to make sure that those would be decisions and consequences that I would be comfortable with if they happened. So I'm really grateful they did that, because we would be having a very different conversation right now if they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So something else that I wanted to talk about on that note is, I mean, as everyone just heard, that is a very, very rocky roller coaster that you've been on since, was it 2007? You said was like the first. Yeah. So that's that's a very long time. And I would say, in the last few years, the effects of your disease have been really consuming. And what I find interesting is that, you work as a coach and you are very analytical and you really think things through. That's something that I love about you.
Not my husband, but thank you. I'll tell him somebody loves me.
No, it's like, you make me feel normal, because my brain just always is like.
I get it.
So what I wanted to ask you, what I found cool just from the talks that we had is that, you've implemented some things in your life to support you. through endo. So I'd love to like for you to share those things. And what I also really find cool is that when something no longer served you, you also had like the intuition, so the emotional intelligence to know like this is not helping me in my disease. So yeah, if you can just kind of talk about that, like what did you incorporate? What was really helpful? And then like kind of things for women, or like intuitive things or feelings that women shouldn't ignore to make the healing or the whole process of managing chronic illness easier.
For sure.
That's clear.
Well, I think, well, it's, and it's funny because like I said to you, when you first reached out to me, or when we started talking, is that in a way it kind of always felt like the two were separate, because endo, and I call it endo, and I consider myself an endo warrior, because it kind of snuck up on me real quick and then took over my life. And there was kind of no time to process, because by then it was just so advanced. It was kind of like, okay, well, we don't have many options now. So how do we just manage the pain? Mm-hmm. How do we explore potential solutions for fertility? Because actually an important piece, before I get into the coaching perspective, an important piece that I forgot to mention, which is kind of key, is that in fact, a natural pregnancy, or being able to carry a pregnancy to term and having my own child, is considered the medical treatment in a way, like the best solution for me physically, in addition to personally, of course, but physically, because things are so adhered and stuck in there altogether, that it would be really, really hard on me and my body for its healing if people were to go in with a scalpel. Whereas a pregnancy would kind of like stretch things out a little bit more naturally and progressively to make room for the fetus. So they feel really hopeful about that. And that logic makes sense to me. Whether or not it's true, I don't know, but I'm gonna believe in that. With regards to the coaching approach, I think what has really served me and helped me is
I just want to comment on that. Yeah. I just find it so frustrating. Like as a woman, it's like, well, just go on the pill or get pregnant. You know, it's like, anyway, that just, it's just
true.
it's a hard thing to hear. Anyways, just hearing those options, like, okay, get pregnant, even though you're struggling like crazy. Like the cure for your pain is so hard. It's like, it's out of reach right now. Or you can get major surgery that could like perforate a bowel and change your quality of life forever. Or, just medicate. And I don't know, this is what I don't like about women's health, is that the options are so limited. And like, if we had been pushing major research, years ago, I don't know. I just would hope that there would be more options in that sidebar. But
No. I think it's a really important point. And also something it reminds me that I should specify. I mean, my journey's been a bit different because my pain is not as constant as some women. I know some people who are kind of like in a chronic pain all the time. I have a chronic illness, but my pain fluctuates. So I'll find that I have more severe pain leading up to my cycle or the first 2 days of my cycle. And it's funny, I can hear myself say this and say like, how are you even normalizing this? But I'm lucky in that I have chronic fatigue instead of chronic pain, which is like, no, that still sucks. But if I had to choose between the two, I prefer the chronic fatigue than the chronic pain. Right. But yeah, so I haven't, I guess that's why for me, the option, I'm not as upset or offended by that, like the idea of getting pregnant as a solution, because I'm not in excruciating pain 24 hours a day.
Right.
If I was, I think I would be just as pissed off too and say like, this is unacceptable. And while I think it's unacceptable that from the healthcare system that it's taken this long, and for me to be, quote, annoying and keep going and saying to people like, guys, I'm not crazy. Something's going on. Like, I swear to you, something's going on. And honestly, this is why I'm so happy to share this story with you, because I'm not sure that I would have been able to keep going had I not found one medical professional that believed in me. Add that to the fact that coaching and the training that I got with Concordia and with the ICF, the International Coaching Federation, is something that has helped me for life for a variety of reasons. Because the coaching approach and coaching in general, and there's a lot of bad rep out there for coaching nowadays because it's become a little too
a coach.
Fake and sensational, and everybody's a coach. And actually, I'm starting to hate the term myself. But the philosophy is that you are your own best resource. You are your own key to success. And you actually are the best person to know what tools and what resources you already have or you need for your end result. So that's something that I think, it's funny. I didn't realize I was doing it, but I was doing it. And so looking back as part of this conversation, and I've been writing more and more about my journey to kind of help process it a little bit, because otherwise it just feels just unfair, right? But I started asking myself, what do I want out of all of this? Like, sure, I'd love to be cured of endo, but if I can't, like, what drives me to keep fighting on this every day, or to keep advocating for myself every day? And that is that I want to find answers, and I want to feel heard and supporting. So that question of what do I want out of this, or what do I want my journey to look like, that's a coaching question. And it's me who has the answer for that. Not you, not my doctor, just me. And then the other point was, why is this so important for me? And you have to know why you're doing what you're doing.
Your why.
Because, your why. Because you're not, coaching doesn't love the question why, but I believe you should use it.
Okay.
Like, why am I doing this? Why is this important for me? Or what makes this so important for me? If you don't like why. But it's because that's going to be your fuel. Because there are days where I am in tears, overwhelmed by everything, because it feels like I have 3 full-time jobs between my medical appointments and follow-ups and keeping everything up to date, in addition to my actual full-time job and my private practice. So, that essence of understanding what makes us so important for you will help you stay motivated and not give up. And then the other question that I've often had to ask myself is, what or how will I get there? So for those things that I really want, how am I going to do it? How am I going to get there? And so I established that, well, I'm someone who kind of gave up when the people that I considered experts were telling me, it's all in your head. Don't worry about it, you pretty little thing. Like, you're young, you're fine. And I swear to you, I'll never forget, like, sometimes I got the feeling that they were just like, oh, they're there.
Hush, hush.
Everything's fine. Just, yes, exactly. Like the hush, hush you were talking about.
I had one of my patients, she first got her diagnosis because she was lucky enough that you could really see her massive endometrioma. And
really?
Her doctor told her at 18, well, you should start having kids now. That was his only advice. Yeah. Anyway,
that's
just
horrible.
A side note, but
yeah, no, but it's yeah. So that would be, what does that 18-year-old patient, what do I want out of this? Do I really want to become a mom at 18? Is that really my only option? Like, look inwards to establish what's important for you, what jives with your values, and what really doesn't.
Okay.
Because medical professional, not everyone's going to have an opinion on what you should and shouldn't do.
So right.
And at the end of the day, you're the one who's going to be paddling up that Schitt's Creek. So, you can use other people's input and advice. And I like to see it as the compass. You're asking for a tool. This is a tool that's a little bit more internal, and that you have to kind of fine tune with more self-knowledge and more confidence with yourself. So I would say this one is a little bit further along the process. when you're getting a little bit more confidence about what's important for you and how you want to get there and what do you feel you need from others, from yourself, then you can start doing, I call it the compass, where you take a piece of information and you just sit with it to see, like that reaction, you know, that client of yours that was told, you know, you better focus on having a kid now. Well, what's your reaction? Does your stomach like go up to your mouth and you're thinking, like you get this feeling of like I can't breathe? Or do you get this like, oh my God, that would be amazing. And you get like this soft, warm, fuzzy feeling. Well,
I love that.
That too, that's your compass. Like that first reaction. And this is why someone like me who's analytical really loves to practice this, because when I use it, I realize most of the time I'm not giving my body enough credit when it's telling me my gut reaction. And then I'm going in my brain, yeah, but the stats say, or, you know, the doctor said, okay, but how do I feel about it? Because it's my body.
That's so useful for people who are overly analytical and thoughtful. And I'm thinking about myself. Like, that's such an easy tool. Like, you're given a piece of information. Do you feel good or do you feel bad? And
don't
like, trust that
first reaction.
Because that's, oh, thanks for sharing that. I find that very useful.
Pleasure. And then what I would suggest is even take it a step further and start visualizing a little bit. Start visualizing like, okay, well, I felt the gut reaction of like, ooh, that one's not as the one I want, but this is the one that I'm more drawn to. Play with those two ideas. Like imagine yourself maybe in that one that you had a good feeling about and play it out, picture it, work out the steps, just imagine and see, okay, am I still feeling excited about it? And if not, like, what are the stops I'm stopping at? What are the points I'm stopping at? Is it, you know, those subtleties are really going to help you by you listening. And again, it's easy to say to listen yourself. I want to say, well, for lack of a better word, play and explore with yourself to kind of see what makes you feel like it's the right fit.
Right.
And for the analytical side, something that really, I think, saved my life in more ways than like sometimes literally, was that I realized that the medical professionals were always asking me like, so when did that happen? And what medications were you taking? And what was the diagnosis? And I was like, oh my freaking God, I don't remember. Like it was 10 years ago or 5 years ago. I mean, hell, sometimes if it's 2 years ago, I can't remember all the details. So for the last nearly 4 years, definitely 3, I've started putting everything online. I've created a OneNote and OneDrive file, and I am putting everything online. So when I go into an appointment with my GP, I have my laptop or my phone, and I have my notes on it. And it allows me to prepare my questions in advance. So I like always prepare my questions a couple of days before my appointment. So I've really had the chance to think of, okay, what do I want to ask the doctor? Because I don't know about you, but if I don't prep that and I go in, all of a sudden I'm like, oh, wait. And I completely forget what questions I had to ask. And the second I leave the room, I'm like,
think of all of them.
No, I forgot to ask like 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah.
So I write them all down now and I do it in advance. And then I take notes. And I take notes just like the doctors take notes as they talk with me. I take notes when I talk to them. And I'll never forget. I mean, I do sometimes from some doctors get a couple of looks like, but honestly, I say to all of the people who might feel uncomfortable, do it. Do it, because I will never forget. The doctor had said, call the hospital and book this appointment. And I call the hospital, speak to the reception, one of the admin staff, and I say, Dr. So-and-so has asked me to get this test. Oh, don't you mean Y test? Like they mentioned another test. And I was like, So I pulled out my notes and I reread exactly what I had written down from the doctor. And I said it again. And that's when she was pushing a little bit further. And I said, look, I'm supposed to get this test because of this and because of that. And then I had no problem and she booked me the right test. But I could have wasted about 2 months getting to the date of my appointment, going to the hospital, only be told, well, what are you doing? You're not at the right spot. Like, why are you doing this test? So the fact that you can write that down and have something that's live, right? Because I can correct it, I can modify it, I can then go back and highlight any questions I might have forgotten to ask. So I find that really dynamic and helpful.
To give people a visual, like how many times a week would you say you have some sort of medical appointment to fertility related, or phone call, or?
Oof, it really depends on what's going on. Because if I'm in a fertility cycle, right, like it depends. If you're in an IUI, there's not as much to do as if you're in an IVF. So depending on when you're in an IVF, I've had times where it was every second day I was at the hospital. So, you know, in 8 days, if you're going into the hospital waiting an hour to an hour and a half each time for your appointment before you go to work, that's a whole other part-time job added on to your full-time job.
Wow.
And with the phones, I mean, look, I, with time, was able to speak to a nurse and thankfully got an email from a nurse that I only use in emergency cases because I don't want to overuse it, right? But developing those personal links so that you know the system and you know who you can turn to and when.
Absolutely.
And building that network, I consider them cheerleaders now too, because now they know my story. And I think what's also really important is it's normal that we're going to be emotional and upset. What's important is verbalizing things in factual information. Because at the end of the day, if I lose my shit on you, you're going to feel a personal attack and you're going to become protective. I mean, well, not you specifically, because I know you're a very thoughtful person and you would be like trying to find a solution. But if someone else is having a bad day and they're receiving the brunt of my upset, which has actually recently happened, I was in tears because someone said, you're not on the schedule. I was like, what do you mean? You gave me a phone call. You left me a voicemail. I called you back. I left you a voicemail. Now I'm here at 8 a.m. and you're telling me I'm not on the schedule? She was like, well, I don't know. I was like, well, you're going to have to figure it out because I'm here. And I remember her just being like, I'm not going to have anything about this, which I understand. She doesn't have the like weeks and months of frustration and half an hours and 45-minute wait times on calls like I do. So I have to take a step back and say, look, I'm sorry. It's nothing personal, but, and then I list things factually. Your colleague called me yesterday, left me a voicemail. I took the time to call someone back here and leave a voicemail. And she specifically said in her voicemail, I didn't have to call back to confirm because I was saved on the schedule. If you want, I have the voicemail with me. So I said it in a way where it's kind of like, take this information or leave it. But then the ball was kind of in their court. And it wasn't crazy patient losing their shit on me. And a patient who somehow experienced an administrative miscommunication, and it may be our fault. So that would be something else that I would say. Try and just kind of be strategic in your reflection of, okay, if I were in the other person's shoes receiving this emotion, how would I take it? And how can I frame it in a way that they will hear me and understand what I'm going through? So that would be another tip that I would try and suggest, and something for those that I hadn't known. And it was actually a doctor that told me this, which, you know, when you think about it, it's kind of sad that no one ever tells you this. But from my surgery, I kept finding when I was going to other medical professionals, they would ask, oh, the surgery, like, what were the results and what is it like in there? And I was saying, I was realizing I have no idea. Like, I can describe to them certain things. But if they're asking me, like what you were saying, the posterior abdominal wall, I don't even know if that's the right term, but the posterior whatever, or the cul-de-sac, or, you know, all these things, I'm like, I don't know what these things mean, and I don't know where they are in my body. So a doctor actually told me that you can request the archives for your medical files. And they'll print out to you. In my case, it was like about 20 some pages. And so I took the time on a weekend, one day, with, you know, a nice treat and a cup of coffee. Well, tea, usually. Don't drink too much coffee if you have endo, by the way, just a side note. But I read it and I found the 2 pages that was the most relevant. And I think I did it with you even. I was like, hey, here are my 2 pages so that you know what it's like in my insides, because it's your language,
it's very
right?
helpful.
It makes sense for you, and it helps me because then you know exactly what things are like in there, and I don't have to worry about miscommunicating something because it's not my language.
Of course.
So I think those would be, those are some concrete tools, some concrete questions. And the reason why I also think that the notes are so helpful is that the Quebec healthcare system seems pretty fragmented to me. As someone who's originally from Ontario, I have a really hard time understanding if my doctor sends me for, an ultrasound in one hospital, why is it that my clinic then doesn't have access to the ultrasound and it has to get faxed somehow by some human? Nothing is all connected. So I find that having those notes, like this day, this time, this test, can even, it's a bit more work, but it helps you follow up with the reception and be like, hey, just making sure for my appointment that you guys received this result. Because I've sat in a meeting once being told that, we were going to look over the results of your ultrasound, but unfortunately we still haven't received them and we weren't able to check before your appointment. So not in my file, right? So those things I think I'd say are biggest that stand to mind. So listen to your body. And I know it's really hard to believe it, but your body's never wrong. Like my body got me into the hospital in October. I have no doubt. I have no doubt that my body said, no one wants to listen to me. We're going to get them to listen to you. And that's how I got into the hospital.
Good.
And again, stroke of luck that my gynae was there because I could have been sent back home. So you do have to really keep knocking, and listen to podcasts like this and share with people your challenges and your story. Because the more we talk about this, the more we're going to discover. I just discovered recently that 2 good friends of mine have recently been diagnosed with endo. And, I had no idea, but it was because I had been telling them about my challenges that they started asking questions. And then they discovered that they had it too. So now we're kind of able to share that knowledge and those resources together.
That's exactly why I want to have more and more women on here, because, you were saying before how, I feel like everyone with endo kind of knows this, but I'm like, no, like there's so many people, like you just had a very personal example of that. It's like, the more we talk about it, people, it's also still kind of taboo to talk about your periods to people, or to talk about like how sex hurts or not. So just hearing somebody voice that, and there's something about, finally having answers and finally understanding what's going on and why you've been feeling a certain way, that it is just, it's really like a massive, like dark cloud lifted for so many women. So I'm really happy that we got to have you on here and to hear your story. And this kind of goes with the theme too of this podcast, is that, you could turn on social media and see how it's like, oh, don't have dairy, don't have gluten, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. Meanwhile, people who actually have fucking endo are just out there trying to manage the friggin' medical system. It's like, you're just trying to literally manage your appointments and get through the day. And I'm so grateful that you shared, concrete tips that can help people. So, taking notes, listening to your body, like that will save people so much time. And that's actually very useful to anyone who's listening. So I'm really grateful that there's my dog barking now. Who knows what's up?
Proud dog moms unite.
So I'm really grateful that you came. And I also just wanted to, for all the people out there who aren't, in healthcare or in a profession where you have to support another human, because I've had times in my life where I felt extremely down, depressed. And when I was in osteo school and I had to go to our external clinic and lift somebody else up, I felt like could be on the verge of tears every day, because there's just something about that mentally where it's like, I really need somebody to support me and care for me. And here I am, like, putting on a brave face for someone else, and everything they're going through is valid. But I just want people to really understand, like, the work that you're doing is hard. Like, you're propping someone else up on a daily basis when you yourself need that support as well. So anyway, that's just a sidebar, I guess, to encourage anyone out there who knows somebody dealing with this, especially people who are going through the fertility process, because it just sounds like hell and it sounds hard.
I think it's much hard, like, in itself it's hard, but throw in a pandemic and, like,
yeah,
you know, I completely understand the medical crises that we're going through. And I don't want to diminish that. But I think what's interesting to me is that I'm realizing now, too, that because I've been in it now for 4 years, and because I've had to inform myself and research, it nearly seems way more present in the world. And I think that's why I said to you before we started the recording that I feel like my story is like just anybody else's story. But I think it's kind of like that idea of, you know, when you're looking at a new car and all of a sudden all you see is that new car, but maybe before you didn't notice it because you weren't actually looking at it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of what is happening to me, in that now I'm naturally gravitating towards people and conversations like that, because one of my personal missions in life now is I don't want anyone else to have to go for 10 years without knowing that this is what they have. Mm-hmm. I mean, I may have been taken away my possibility of carrying my own children because I believed someone else over myself. And that's a hard pill to swallow. Medical pun not intended. But like, so I think it's great that you're doing this. And I think it's really key for people to voice it. Like you're saying, like if they're finding something hard, if they're finding it stressful, if they're feeling lost, if they feel alone, I think the best that any of us can do is, you know, by having this conversation today, is reach out to me. I mean, sure, I do career and personal life coaching, but if the fact that my story has resonated with you, I'd be happy to just have a conversation on, you know, who's my gynae and where are they, or, you know, just anything at all that could be helpful, because information is power. And friends and numbers is power too, because then you get recommendations, like people who have had good experiences who can lead you to down certain paths that will align with what you're looking for. So it's that team effort between yourself, between you listening to yourself, listening to your body, and staying true to what feels important for you, whilst letting others in your network know what you're going through, so that you can have extra sets of eyes and ears and heads to help you for when the days of journey feels too hard.
So well said. And where could people find you if, you know, they wanted to reach out, whether that's from a coaching perspective or wanting to chat about endo?
Yeah. Well, they can find me on Instagram on my personal if they want. That's Natty, if I recall, natty.lcg. Or the quick and easiest way is on our website, which is www.goodpathcoaching.com. Or our Instagram, our Facebook. LinkedIn's coming soon. Awesome. But those I'd say would be the easiest. So it's www.goodpathcoaching.com.
Amazing.
And that would be a great starting point.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Riley. And I want to say that you are part of the healthcare professionals that make this journey way more manageable. And I think it's important to acknowledge that too.
Oh, well, thank you for saying that.
Yeah. I'm definitely not looking for any other osteopaths. So looking forward to our next appointment.
Me too. Okay, well, have a great night, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.